interesting chronicle of progress and setbacks. So in first week of the COP, we could see a lot of interesting discussions between the 200 nations, and of the various announcements that came from the opening week. I would like to highlight the agreement on the loss and damage fund to support vulnerable countries, and this has had the support of the United Arab Emirates, Germany, UK, Japan, and the EU, and the United States, that all pledged to contribute to this fund. Again, one of the most important breakthroughs was on December 2, with the signing of a commitment of more than 120 countries to triple their renewable energy production capacity and double their energy efficiency rate. The dark part of this was that China and India were absent from this initiative. There was also a declaration on nuclear energy, and 22 countries announced that they will triple nuclear power capacity till 2050. And the EU and the member states announced 175 million euros to support methane financing program. As you remember, this comes from COP26 in Glasgow. But now we also saw 50 oil and gas companies committed to this abate on methane emissions. It was created the Climate Club. It was launched and by 33 members. And also the G7 countries joined this club, and the idea is to interchange intergovernmental experiences for the decarbonization of industry. On the day in 9 December, we also saw an important joint declaration on climate and biodiversity. This had already been launched in the Paris Agreement and later in China in Kunming Montreal framework. But again, there was a commitment, and but we also a great deal of controversies, mainly from the male participants and from the president of COP, that denied that he said there is no science to indicate that phasing out fossil fuels is necessary to attain to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrades. So at the end of the long discussions, country denying the decision of abating fossil fuels, after 1 day after the day the COP should end, we saw a consensus, and after long discussions, the countries gathered at the Climate Summit and approved by consensus a decision calling for a transition away from fossil fuels. We all saw that the president of the COP said this was extraordinary, but even though, in my opinion, it raises a lot of doubts. So, nevertheless, our great woman, Ursula von der Leyen, praised the final agreement as marking beginning of the post-fossil era. And also we had the Gender Day at COP in 4th December. I had the chance to participate by invitation of Maria João Rolim, which she is here with us. And the Gender Day, Gender and Responsive Just Transitions and Climate Action Partnership was created, was announced, and endorsed by 60 countries. So this is a wrap-up of what happened at COP. The spot highlight of it was climate, and here we are to discuss climate. So before passing to our participants, I will pass the floor to Yara. She is Director of Electrical and Architectural Lighting Department at Thomas Company. And so she will very briefly share with us some thoughts. Yara, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. So just a second, I want only to share my screen. And then we can start.
Yes, we can see.
So as today we celebrate the remarkable achievements of women in the energy industry, I would like to thank you all for the invitation to share in this inspiring discussion. Our goal is to spotlight the incredible achievements of women in the energy industry, women who have led innovations, solutions, trying to transform the landscapes. As we see, today's agenda is packed with several conferences that dive into their stories and the impact of their work. Before we dive into these or today's discussions, I want to take several minutes to highlight the innovation in Israel over the past decade, especially the revolutionary changes in the electrical field. Israel has witnessed a remarkable transformation, and it's essential to acknowledge the strides made in advancing technology and sustainability. As you can see, one of the projects we in Topaz are working on is the solar fields that will produce 100 megawatts of electricity that will be erected at the highway number 6 in Israel, intersections crossing Israel from the north to the south. The 100 megawatts, it equals 1,450 empty dunams available at 12 interchanges on the highway, which could accommodate the facilities planning to generate electricity and will be able to help establish charging stations for electrical vehicles along the busy highway. As you can see, the electrical revolution in Israel has not only transformed the industry, but has also had a profound impact on our daily lives. From cutting-edge technology to sustainable practices, these developments have paved the way for a more efficient and environmental conscious future. So now let's connect these innovations with the inspiring achievements of women in the electrical and energy sector. Their contribution have been instrumentally in driving these advancements, showcasing not only their expertise, but also their dedication to creating positive changes. As you can see, or as shown in this old diagram, according to Israeli Electrical Company in year 2012, we can see that the percentage of women workforce was very low. As you can see, approximately 19%. So we had 64 women in the company and 155 men on the other hand. However, and it was from 2012 actually till 2021, sorry. In 2021, the percentage went up from 19% till 20% females. However, It was a very however, the aim, according to Vice President of Human Resources at the electrical company, is to take in 60% women, which I call it is a success for us, for our community as women. So thank you very much for having me here, and I am very excited to share and learn from you all today. Thank you so much. Have a great time.
Thank you, Yara, for your testimony. And now we have a slight change in our agenda because Maria da Graça Carvalho needs to travel, so she will be the first presenter, followed by Eva Brickick, because she also has a meeting afterwards. So I will introduce Maria da Graça Carvalho, that she is a member of the European Parliament, Vice Chair of Fisheries Committee, full member of Industry, Research and Energy Committee, and a substitute member of Internal Market and Consumer Protection and Women's Rights Committees. She was a senior advisor of the Commission for Research, Science and Innovation, Carlos Moedas, now the mayor of Lisboa. She was a member of the European Parliament between July and 2009 and 2014, before this mandate. She was also one of the rapporteurs of the science programs from the European Commission, the Horizon 2020. She was the principal advisor of President Barroso in the fields of science, higher education, innovation, research policy, energy, environment, and climate change. She also served as Minister of Science and Higher Education. She is the responsible for my presence at LENEG. Thank you, Graça, for the friendship. And she was, as I was saying, Minister of Science, Innovation and Higher Education at Portuguese government, and she is a full professor at University of Lisboa, at Instituto Superior Técnico. So, Graça, the floor is yours. You are going to address us the topic, building women's capacity for climate action. And thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and I would like to thank the kind invitation to be here today with you. I have apologized that I cannot follow the whole discussion because I'm here in Strasbourg, but I need to travel out of Strasbourg immediately after I have talked here in this event. And I also want you to congratulate for this initiative because it's a very important initiative. And why it's important initiative is that when we look at the reality in climate change and all the reports of the United Nations and all the evidence of the International Energy Agency, you see that women are the most exposed to the effects of climate change, mainly in developing countries. The percentage of women in poverty, and especially in areas that are the poverty is related with the drafts and relate to climate change consequences. They are usually very poor countries in Africa, and the women are the poor of the poorest of the poor, and they are also the ones that are more subject to the effects on air pollution. That is in certain way two sides of the same coin, because they are the ones, for example, that are cooking from wood and have very high level of diseases due to the particles and the emissions from the very badly designed cooking cookers that they use with the wood. So it's very important that we also look at the consequence of the climate change and the environment for women. And one of the reasons that this point has not been so well addressed is that we don't have enough women in the sphere of climate change. We have some, and the ones that we have are very bright and are well known, and it's very good that it's like that. So we have women fighting for environment and for climate change as scientists, as legislators, as leaders, as political leaders, as CEOs in companies and engineers in companies. So they do a fantastic work, but they are not enough. And we can see that in the negotiation of the United Nations on the COPs. I didn't go to this COP and the previous one, but I had the privilege to start going to COPs very early when we had prepared the Kyoto protocol and the entering into force. And I continue until quite recent, 2-3 years ago, going to COP, and it was still like this. And I suppose it continues to be like this. Is a majority of is a very much a man-related environment. But it's not only on these negotiators at the United Nations levels that we have a few women. We also have in the professions that are very important for combating climate change. I have done an initiative report. I have done 2 initiative reports here in the Parliament. It's not a directive, it's not a regulation, it's something that is like a report where you call the attention for a fact and you call action to Commission and action to member states. And I did one on the women on energy, and I did another one on women in digital. Because energy and digital are 2 areas of future of Europe, and they are hand in hand, the digital transition and the energy transition, and is the main economic agenda of the present President of the Commission, Mr. Ursula von der Leyen, but it's not only the priorities, is the agenda that now is the agenda of Europe because it was adopted by the Parliament and by the Council, is our political agenda, is our economic agenda, is based on this transition. And when we look at the persons that are the actors to do this transition, you see that they are the 2 areas that you have lower percentage of women, for example, in university. We have in Europe, in the EU, we are almost in parity between women and men in universities. Some countries like Portugal, we are higher in the number of women. But when you start looking at digital, and it's interesting because the percentage in Portugal is the same as the EU. We have 22% of the students are girls in digital. Both at the European level and the Portuguese, and the energy is more difficult to count because you have several degrees that that you can go to work on energy. But if you look at the mechanical engineer, the part of energy of mechanical engineer, the electrical engineer, and some part of the economy, economists for the economy of energy. But even like that, the figures that we have is about 16%. So it's very high because in many areas, the women are 80%, 85%, even areas that are that in the recent past we are very dominated by men, like law, and the women's going to the judge to become a judge. That was some years ago very male dominant. Now is a very high percentage in Portugal. Is the 70%, 80% of the young judges are women, the ones that enter in the profession. So we are in the areas that are important for the economy and for the future of Europe. Women are in very small small percentage, and this 16% is mainly on the students, but also on the labor force. It's very interesting. That is a similar the labor force in the energy sector. But if we go to higher degrees of leadership in the companies, is much lower. So there is a work here to draw the attention of first of the population and the young girls, that these areas are important, that they should choose these areas, and this is something that should be done by the society at all, for the whole society, but also the family, also the schools. And the universities and the polytechnical schools have a big responsibility to, when they do the open days, when they do the publicity, to attract women. Sometimes there is not this big effort to attract girls for these degrees, and this is like a social responsibility of the leaders of the universities or the higher education institutions to call for more women. I just give you an example that shows small things that you can do. Every year that I was doing the open day in my department, that is the Department of Mechanical Engineer, that I was receiving the students, we would have much more girls in the next year, they enter us in the next year, than when was men only doing it. Once, usually having 150 students, 2 or 3 girls, not more. Like in my time, it didn't improve a lot. One year that I did only with PhD students that were girls that we showed around the open day, the next year we had 25. So it shows the difference, and it shows that they identify with us. One I was telling, oh, I thought that you women, that I knew that there were women working on energy, but I thought that they were all full of coal dust and dressing in the very different way. So you are dressing normal, you have makeup, and so that is an important. So big responsibility of the institutions and to attract more, and the governments, because we also sometimes we have these questions of the numerous clauses, and we need to have a policy that looks at things not only the incremental, but it takes the responsibility here and there. We need a big number, so let's increase the number in these areas. Second point, women in the companies. We have a problem on women at the highest levels of companies. That was so evident that something that usually is not very well accepted at European level, but we managed to do it, and I was proud to be one of the negotiators, is the directive of women on board. That we have set targets, binding targets for women in the transitory period for a certain 7 or 8 years. So after that, we hope that we don't need it anymore, that we are targeting to increase the number of women in boards of big companies. 33, that they are 33% of the board if they are executive functions, and 40% non-executive functions. that is important to kick off, to start getting to have a critical mass that is so important. The other question is the entrepreneurship, the women to create their own projects and to request venture capital, funding in the banking, funding in the EIB, that there is real hidden bias when a woman that is owner of a SME, of a startup, to get money is much more difficult than a man. And all the statistics shows that. Is is something that we need to fight against this, because it's not true, it's proven that's not true. World Bank has changed this because they really realize that they can trust even much more a woman than a man to lend them money. And they have changed completely this mentality. But in Europe, in the banks, even in the EIB, we still have. Sometimes we open a window for women entrepreneurs, but it's a small window, you know. It's the general funding that we need to treat women like we treat men, and to have also opportunities in all the programs that sponsor startups, that they do well, and they are well designed for women to be successful. We have a problem in some of the areas of the framework program, the European framework program. We have very few women that are leaders of consortium. And even in the European Research Council, we have a very big gap in areas where women are a majority. Physics, biology, we have a very large number of women, even equal numbers of men and women researchers in biology in Europe. But we have much more European Research Council that are very restrictive, very selective, much more men. Only 14% of the grants are for women. And we don't have a study, but I'm convinced that is the question of the interview. They have a kind of a short presentation of yourself, and women are much modest to present themselves than men, and that makes all the difference. So they arrive to the stage of the interview in much better numbers between men and women, and the big difference is with the interview. We had an interview in the EIT, and I asked the commissioner, Maria Gabriel, the previous commissioner, to change and to make sure that these figures would have to keep in some way before and after the interview. And they have to find a way that the interview, some noise, that interview was not distorting the selection. And that is a problem on the selection. Last 2 points.
So could you please mute the microphone, because we are hearing some background noise?
I think they did. So the last points that are very important is the importance of role models. So the women that achieve certain positions, they should show up. And there it's also sometimes women, because they have so many things to do, and they hesitate to accept our positions or to speak, and we should try to make an effort to be exposed so that other will follow our way and are not afraid of getting involved in activities, speaking in public, getting responsibility, because women sometimes they are afraid. if I fail, if I don't fail. So they are not courage enough. A man always says yes, even if he's not prepared, and women think 10 times before they accept. And so the role models is very, very important, and the role of networks. And for example, like we have the Women's on Energy, it is very, very, we create and because one of the advantage of men, because natural they have their networks, old boys networks since the schools, and women usually do not have these networks, and these networks are very important to create a community. But also is for example, for me is very important in the European Parliament. Many times we have events on energy, on industry, and I look at the program and say there are no women, and it's all we could not find. I have a list now that I always send a list, and here you have 50 or 70, you just choose one. And like this, they are obliged because they don't recall. Oh, I don't remember any women working on energy. So if you have these lists, they cannot say that there is not enough women, that they could not find one. It's very important that we don't have panels discussing these subjects that are only men. So a lot of things to do. As I told you, I have done an initiative report on digital and another on energy, where I look at the numbers, identify the actions that can be done. Also, the media has a big role to play, interviewing people, calling the attention. So the media will be very important. The schools, the governments, the society at general, the university and the higher education institutes, and us to tell our stories, that the women should not be afraid, the young girls should not be afraid of choosing certain professions and continue, because there is also a drop off during they in these areas that there is not sufficient percentage of women at the beginning. They tend to abandon much more than the others. So because they are in a male environment, and the tendency is that sometimes they go to do something where they feel more comfortable. So usually we lose women in these areas along the career. So all that needs to be fighted against, so that we have a sufficient number of women in these areas that are so important for the future. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you on these subjects.
Thank you, Graça, for putting us the picture of women in STEM areas. And I thought it was better than the picture you put to us. And I have a comment. There is such a scarcity of women, and yet, although they are less than men in universities, these areas of discussion related with climate change, normally women are in percentage much better students than men. And
for example, there is always a big discussion in Portugal and probably in some other countries on the women on medicine, and I had this argument with the women on boards, because a lot of colleagues of mine didn't want the women on boards, because they were coming to me and say, "Oh, we only want women to progress by merit." You should go by merit. Probably you don't feel well if it's not merit. But I'd say, when is merit? Only merit. Women do much better. And the proof is these degrees like medicine, when it's very high level of marks, we have the opposite problem. We have some of the years in Portugal is almost 90% girls. We are starting having the problem that there are no sufficient men that are medical doctors. And it's because there is no subjective criteria. Is when there is a subjective criteria of the network, influence of the network, interviews, things like that, that women starts losing compared with men. If it's strictly effort, studying, performance, women do not need any quotas, anything. So was my argument with the women on boards. And the women on boards we need because the boards are done by people that know each other, that are friends from many years, and they don't remember to call for women. They pick up their male friends from the university, from the golf, from whatever, and that's women lose.
Thank you, Graça, very much, and have a nice travel. Thank you. I will now pass the word to Eva Brekic. She is, let me look at my notes. She is an energy analyst, and she all her career was made internationally. She worked for the Atomic Energy Agency, was energy consultant in Westwood Global Energy Group, joined the Croatian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and worked as an energy, trade and sustainable development specialist. She also joined the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe in Geneva to work on sustainable energy portfolio. At Tunes, Eva is leading the work on carbon neutrality and is the secretary of the Committee on Sustainable Energy. She's working closely with member states and policymakers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and carbon footprint of the energy sector in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. She's going to speak to us about how to build a resilient and carbon neutral energy system. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you again for this opportunity to join this fantastic group. Yes, I would like to present a little bit our work on how to build a resilient and carbon neutral energy system. So it will be like a short technical presentation. But now, inspired by the words of Madame Carvalho, I might actually start with my last slide, which was tailored. Actually, I tried to pull out some numbers from our work at United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, where we really looked at the amount of the human power or hours of actually human capital to deliver an energy transition. And hearing everything what we have on all the statistics that Madame Carvalho actually just shared with us, it is the fact that the energy sector is missing out on experiences, skills, and talents of almost half of the human population. So we certainly have to now not only to restart rethinking how to reshuffle our energy systems to make them more carbon neutral and resilient, but also how to unlock the potential and how to foster the next generation of energy experts, which will be with gender parity. So the technical presentation I will show you, but before I maybe dive in my slide, I would like to highlight that at UNECE, we work with experts across Europe, Central Asia, and North America. We work very much on the capacity building, and I think relevant for our today's discussion is how we build this capacity and how can we unlock the potential by building interest with the younger generation of energy experts, both girls and boys, because that human potential we will certainly need in next 30 years to deliver on our goals. So having said that, I would now like to share my slides. Let me see. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So first, I would like to tell a little bit more about our carbon neutrality toolkit. This project was implemented by UNEC, but really with our expert community. It was about identifying technology and policy options to get to net zero by 2050. And if you scan this QR code, you will actually land on a website with a lot of reports that zoom in on the potential of different technologies that are necessary to get to net zero, but also what is this interplay between low and zero carbon technology for the UNEC region to get to net zero. We are also now applying that toolkit on some national level. For example, here we already have a publication for Ukraine to help Ukraine rebuild its energy system under the framework of carbon neutrality and resilient energy systems once the time is ripe after the war. And we're also applying it for Central Asia and the Republic of Moldova. Why I'm mentioning it, when we were developing this toolkit, the main question was for us, how can we really effectively raise awareness about the actions which need to happen immediately, and how can we at UNEC with our expert community develop tools that communicate complex issues in a simple way. I invite you all to have a look in these reports. So we are now working extensively with universities actually in Central Asia, but also in United Kingdom, and Madame Hankoy is also on the call. We will hear more about work also on the resource management which Karen is leading. But what I want to say is that these tools enabled us really to spark this interest with younger generation, both boys and girls, high school and universities, and we are now very extensively working in Central Asia and Eastern Europe to help those technical universities to adapt their curriculum and prepare students to be ready for this next to prepare the next generation to be ready with skills to deliver on energy transition. The main takeaway that from our work and what we are now very much from this carbon neutrality implementation communicating that the energy sector of the future is interconnected. There is an interplay of low and zero carbon technologies, and most importantly, also the different sectors are interconnected in a way also communicate to each other. We heard that the importance of innovation and digitalization, and in such a carbon neutral and resilient energy system of the future, all these sectors are coming together. So it's not anymore about only energy sector per se. We are here talking really about jobs and careers which are multidisciplinary and that allow also here for a gender balance maybe more just starting position for all. Maybe I'll just show a little bit of data. We concluded that actually in our region, attaining carbon neutrality, it is possible, as you can see in this waterfall chart, but their actions will be needed across the energy sector. And there is really need for innovative technologies to get to the destination, because some of the sectors, such as hard to abate sectors, cannot be easily decarbonized. I invite you again to look at publications, and in case of some additional questions, or maybe if you think that it might be interesting for your audience and UNECE, we would be very happy to cooperate with you. One of the key takeaways is that actually also it's about restructuring the energy system and diversifying the final energy mix. It's about a deep electrification of the energy system, of the final energy mix. Now we are looking very closely on where this electricity will come from, how we can create a market with beyond European Union where we share electricity resources. So it's becoming very much the question of energy diplomacy in the eastern part of the UNEC region. And if we add like here a little bit of a gender angle, it is true, and the statistics show that women are prone to negotiate and build those cross regional and cross border agreements more effectively. And we are actually seeing that in the eastern part of our region. We're working closely with member states and a younger generation, and to foster the next generation of energy experts, and to really promote the role of women in the policy making and negotiations for such agreements. There is always a question like who pays, and as you can see on this chart, and as you all know, the energy transition costs, but we cannot compromise on it, because if we don't act, the cost of not acting will be much greater than actually this increase of 1.6% compared to the reference scenario. Now, I would like to also introduce a little bit our concept on building resilient energy systems. This is the concept that we developed with our member states end of 2022, provoked by the situation, geopolitical situation in our region. I don't want to say that maybe beginning of 2022, a little bit, we saw some signals that maybe there should be a compromise on environmental sustainability and reaching Paris Agreement targets, but there were, and most of us experienced, there were some measures which were signaling that maybe those Paris Agreement goals and attainment of net zero is at risk. So then, beginning of 2022, we decided to work with our expert community to think how a resilient energy system in the UNEC region and beyond could look like. And as you can see here on the chart, it really is built on the 3 pillars of energy security, so delivering on stable and reliant energy at all times. Making it affordable so that it supports the economic growth, but not compromising also on environmental sustainability to deliver on net zero or clean energy systems. And together with our expert community, we developed this short, very high-level report. It actually includes a menu of options for policy makers, how to build resilient and carbon neutral energy systems, with also some key considerations. I would like maybe to highlight, since we are an intergovernmental body, and we make decisions in consensus. We are a consensus building intergovernmental body. When you read this document, you will see that some options maybe work for some countries and other for others. This is because every country has different starting position, different legislative structure, level of economic development, access to the natural resources, and not all options obviously are viable in every country. And finally, to maybe connect again the dots and bring here the role of women, we worked on one publication last year that really looked at the role of women in energy transition. And maybe some numbers that are also similar to those that Madame Carvalho shared. It is true, that is the fact that women still make only about 1/3 of the workforce in energy sector, and it's also very disproportional in traditional fossil fuel industries versus renewable energy. So we are seeing some more positive trend in renewable energy. However, it's still very low to reach the parity. We heard that for in the venture capitalists, startups, we still have very low share of women. Actually, only 10% of the energy sector startups are run by women as funders. So this is certainly something where we could work together and allow women to really pitch their ideas, shape those ideas. And I like the idea of mentoring. Me myself, actually, I have been always looking also for a mentor in my career and energy career. And I certainly, and sometimes I struggle because the number is growing, but it's still male-dominated sector. So certainly we can work together how to unlock the potential of young innovators, female innovators, and startup funders. So the call for action for policymakers, but also stakeholders across the energy system is there is a need for stronger gender mainstreaming across the whole across all aspects of supporting a just energy transition. And it is necessary also to prepare the industry for gender equality. So not only for women who work in the sector, but also women, how can women benefit more from clean energy? And we heard that also from Madame Carvalho that that women are disproportionately more vulnerable, exposed to less clean sources of energy. So one of the human rights, certainly something that we can together work on. Well, this was my short presentation with some sources from the UNECE and our partners. I'm happy to take any questions. And once again, Teresa and the team, thank you so much for this kind invitation.
Thank you, Eva, for this interesting sharing of either technical and human problems. And I liked a lot the idea of we are losing the diversity and richness that women can bring to climate change by not bringing them in. And also, we are losing the capacity of women to negotiate. Maybe we would have a better world if we had more women. So now, by the sake of time and knowing that Karen is also pressured by other affairs, so I pass the floor to Karen and just taking some notes about her. She's director of the British Geological Survey, geologist with extensive experience in research and innovation management and the minerals and metals industry, is passionate about understanding the complexity of resource management, about environmental and social sustainability, and about the role of geoscience in finding solutions to our societal challenges. She holds a PhD in geology from the University of Copenhagen and worked with research on geological processes and lower crust and mantle and their associated mineral deposits. She's a member of a range of international committees, also at United Nations. Without further ado, I pass the word to Karen. And again, thank you for being with us, sharing your opinions.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and thank you for inviting me. And in a way, I think it's great that I come right after Eva, because I also have another hat that is the expert group on resource management in UNECE, and I will actually sort of end up talking a little bit about some of the things that we are developing there, which of course, Teresa, you yourself are very instrumental in helping bring forward. But let me just share my screen, and I'm also going to go technical on you. I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is, do you see that? Let me just try to go full screen.
Yes, we see.
Yep. All right. So I want to talk perspective on the energy transition. Everything starts with a rock, and it sounds like a super duper general presentation. It really isn't, because I am going to focus in quite quickly and quite a lot on the minerals. But first, let me just look at this. The energy transition, of course, women in climate, or anyone in climate for that matter, there are many aspects to that. Some people study the climate change itself. A lot of people spend a lot of time talking about what possible mitigations we have, and Eva presented quite a bit about that. And that is exactly what I want to talk about here. As being a geologist and a geoscientist, I firmly believe that everything actually does start with a rock, because when we look at the energy technologies that we need to have in the future, they look like this. And so this is sort of the energy transition in a nutshell. And I guess it is being mentioned a lot in the media today that it is the first time we have a COP agreement that actually talks about phasing out oil and gas. It's very clear it's going to take a lot of time, and there's also a lot of talk about whether there are loopholes that will maybe extend it further than we really want. But in this particular figure, there is no oil and gas. These are the energy technologies of the future. These are the ones we need to grow at the same time as we need to start that phasing out that we've now all agreed to. And if you look at if you start at the right-hand side, perhaps you'll see things like compressed air and hydrogen storage and salt domes. You'll see CCS utilization of existing pipelines, so carbon capture and storage. In the water, in the middle there, you'll see a geological map in the circle, and that signifies that before you can put wind turbine into the marine environment, or for that matter into the terrestrial environment, you do need to understand the geology and the stability of the subsurface. Moving further left, you have things like shallow and deep geothermal. So geothermal for potential power and energy, but also for heating our houses and our schools and our hospitals. We have solar panels. We have more wind turbines here onshore. And then you have a battery up here signifying the mining that we need to supply materials for the energy transition and other things. We have finally something called enhanced rock weathering. That's really CCS as well. It's storing of CO2 not in cavities, but rather have them react with certain types of rocks in the subsurface. And finally, you of course have the storage of nuclear waste. So this is the sort of everything starts with the rock bit, that all of these solutions demand a lot of different things. They demand understand the subsurface. So that's the everything starts with the rock bit of geoscience being the foundation of it. But obviously you need a lot of expertise to take them further. You need engineers, you need social scientists, you need people who can implement these technologies on a grander scale. And I'm going to zoom in on the mining, actually. I'm going to zoom in on the materials that we need to support the energy transition. And this is what it looks like. And it's not a very popular concept, because it's perceived as not being green, and we know it has an enormous carbon footprint in itself. So one of the things I want to sort of touch on today is a little bit this sort of thing. What do we do to make this greener? What kind of mitigations can we actually make here? And just to remind everyone, why is it that we talk about this. Yes, the energy transition has been sort of the way we're framing it today, and climate change. But actually, if you look around you, pretty much everything that we surround ourselves with is dug out of the ground. Also the stuff that isn't necessarily in energy technologies, things like our roads, our infrastructure, our houses, the steel, the brick, everything. But also, of course, the cars and the trains and the wind turbines, as you can see back here in the far, all of these demand metals and minerals, and so we need to have conversations about how can we get them in a sustainable way. And just a reality check, this figure here is showing what we're actually mining globally in the world. And on the left-hand column, the pink and blue column out there, that is everything we mine. Everywhere in the world. And as you can see, almost all of it in terms of tonnage, in terms of weight, almost all of it's actually iron. So the pink is iron. And what you can see in the middle column is the stuff that isn't iron. So what does that actually look like? Well, blow that up. You have it here in the middle. You have aluminium, you have manganese, chrome, and copper, and a few other things, but you also have a black rectangle that is called technology and precious metals. And if we blow that up, you see that on the right-hand side. And you see things like rare earth elements, it's the black rectangle. You see lithium, it's a sort of brownish rectangle there. And you see cobalt, it's also sort of a brown color. So a lot of the things that we're talking about for the energy transition is actually sitting in that far hand right side. We have some of copper is one of the things we talk about a lot as well for the energy transition, but actually a lot of the things that we oftentimes talk about as critical are sitting out on the right hand side. And so I don't know what happened here. So critical, what does it actually mean when we talk about critical metals? Because it's one of these things now that just yesterday it was passed, I think, in the European Parliament, the European Critical Minerals Act. So what is it all about? Well, critical is when something is not just important, but there's also a real supply risk. And that's really important to remember because people are using the term sort of right, left, and center to mean important. And actually, if you want to understand criticality and the supply risk side of criticality, then you have to understand a lot of different things, but just why it's important, but you have to understand what are the bottlenecks. This, of course, depends on who's asking. What's important for one country may not be important for another country. What's important for one sector or one company may not be important for other companies or other sectors. So typically it's a very sort of subjective thing when we're actually talking about criticality. But one thing I just want to sort of point out before I talk a little bit about how we might think about this, is that if you look at what's critical, like I mentioned, it looks different for different people. This particular figure here is stolen from USGS, and it's actually sort of online data that you can go and look at. And this is the critical minerals as perceived by the United States. And it's very similar to the list of the European Union. But this map actually shows you where we have known deposits of these critical minerals. And as you can see, there are known deposits pretty much across the entire map here. And what I really want to say with this is it turns out when we talk about these things, even though everything does actually start with a rock, and you can see the many rocks on this picture here, even though that is true, when it comes to criticality, there actually isn't one single metal on one single list anywhere in the world that is on that list because of geological availability. So it's not actually the geology that's the problem. It's definitely part of the solution. It's where the solution starts, but it's not because we're running out of this. It's other things that play into it. So that is the issue that we face with today. So what do we do about this? We have a few different options here, and I'm not going to talk that much about women, but maybe I will a little bit in this portion here, because what we need to think about then, these critical metals, and also the ones that aren't necessarily critical, but they're very important, where are we going to get them from? And we pretty much have two main options. We can either tweak the demand side, which is the top bullet here. Can we just Can we just turn down the demand and just use less? If we used less, there wouldn't be such a pressure on the supply side of things. Or we can crank up supply. And there are two ways we can do that. We can either recycle, so we can get some things from things that are already in use, or we can mine them. And those are pretty much the options that we have. And so how do we think about that? Well, the first one, and this is a really important one, is can we actually manage without minerals for clean energy for the planet? Well, if you look at the statistics, and these are our data from our worldindata.com, and if you look at the numbers here, there is about 940 million people who do not have access to electricity. This is almost 1 billion and almost 15% of the world's population. We've got 3 billion people, 3 billion. It's a staggering number here. It's 40% of the world population do not have access to clean fuels for cooking. And that means that they cook over an open fire. And that is, of course, something that is an enormous health risk and health cost because of air pollution. If you look at who are the people who don't have access to electricity, who are the people who are cooking over an open fire, not surprisingly, it depends a lot on how wealthy your communities are, whether you do have access to these clean energies. And so if we're serious about this, then we need more energy, actually. And it even says on here, number 7 is affordable and clean energy. It is something we've committed to already to doing. And to do that, there are many different things that need to play into that. But actually, less access to energy is not the answer if you look at it globally. And we do need to look at this globally. And I just circled a few of the ones that this actually sort of is affecting. And I put gender equality on here because the 3 billion people who are cooking over an open fire are probably more women than men. And so this is one of the places where we have something that's affecting half of the population much more severely than the other half of the population, and also make this half less available to actually help solve the problems that we are facing, getting them into education, getting them into STEM, and actually managing all of these issues. The other one, as I mentioned, is recycling. You can mine e-waste instead of mining the earth. And this is from a BBC article that was published a year ago, a year and a half ago. And actually, it's a very, very popular way of thinking about resources because people don't like the idea of mining. This is much more attractive. You can draw a green circle. You can draw a closed loop. And you can tell people, if we do this instead of mining, it's much greener. And in principle, that's actually true. It is greener if we could do this. But one of the problems here is that, one, we always need to get things into the loop before we can even start talking about closing the loop. So at some point in time, material needs to come out of the ground and into the loop for it to be available to us to recycle. But another couple of points I want to make is that we haven't used every metal in the periodic table sort of during historical times. The more advanced technologies we have, the more metals we're actually using. And that's one of the issues that we have right now, that we need metals that we didn't used to use. So they're not necessarily available for us in the stock. So that is important. And I'll also say another really important point is as long as we're driving our cars and using our computers, as long as I'm using it, living in my house, you can't actually recycle the raw materials that go into that. And that becomes actually really, really important for the sustainability of secondary resources, because if you have a scenario where you're increasing demand of some metal, which is what we're doing with these new technologies, if you're increasing demand, then you will automatically not be able to cover it by recycling. Because if you take your gadget that you want to recycle, your phone, for example, if you take that and you only use it for 1 year and then you recycle it and you extract every single metal in it, if the demand has gone up on those metals, you're not going to have enough to produce that next mobile phone. And then, of course, we can talk about, well, what about all the stuff we have at home in the drawers? Mine the e-waste. There's this concept of urban mining, and it's almost like we think there's an inexhaustible resource sitting in our drawers and sitting in our dumps. And it's true, if we brought all of that out and extracted everything from it, it may be able to cover our metal needs for a year or 2 or maybe even 3 years, but then we will be out. then the stock has basically been exhausted. And that's why you actually do need to look at what you can recycle in 1 year is what you can use in 1 year, because if you use more than that, you're making recycling actually unsustainable. So that brings us back to we have to dig things out of the ground for these things that are in increasing demand, as well as we have to do the other things. And that brings me back to the UNECE, because we do need to do this. So we have to have an honest conversation about what can we do to do that in a better way, in a way where it isn't perceived as brown or black, and not just not perceived because we're not telling people the truth about it. How can we actually make it a greener thing? And the first thing that springs to mind that's really, really important is we need standards. We need traceability, accountability, and standards. We need to be able to say to companies who produce these phones that we want metals in this phone that have been sourced in responsible ways. And we might even say we want things we want a portion of the metal to be in there to be recycled, these kinds of things. And so we need standardization. And UNECE has actually sort of been a real front runner in trying to put up a system that we can use globally, so that we're all talking about is in the same way. Lots of other standardization and certification initiatives, a lot of which are on this slide, but the left-hand side there is the UNECE standard for how we classify resources, which is the first place to start. And it's a really important methodology. It's called UNFC, United Nations Framework Classification. And the really important thing here is that it looks at degree of confidence, how good is this resource actually? And it is not just for minerals. I'm talking about minerals today, but this could be for anything. This could be for secondary resources, such as the things we have in our drawers. It could be for injection projects such as geothermal or CCS projects. It can be for uranium. It can be for oil and gas. You name it. It is deployable across the spectrum. But it has that degree of confidence as one axis. Technical feasibility is another axis. Can we actually extract gold from this phone in a way where it makes sense for us to do it? And then the final axis, which is a really, really important one for the discussion that we have here today, is environmental, socioeconomic viability. Can we live with the impact? Of course there'll be impact. Just like when we farm, there will be an impact if we start digging things out of the ground, or if we start extracting gold or other metals from our phones and our computers. There will be an environmental impact, but what can we do to manage it? And do we have the right things in place to be able to manage it in the best possible way? This UNFC is part of a bigger picture, which is the UNRMS, that stands for the UN Resource Management System. And the real expert on that is actually Teresa, who's here with us today, who's led a lot of the work in developing this. But the important thing is that the classification sits next to a piece that's about how you manage your resources. So the classification is quite rigorous. It's about projects, it's about exploration, it's about mining, whereas the resource management system is about the entire value chain, and it is about principles for how we want to manage our resources. I'm not going to go into detail with this. You can see there is a lot of detail in there. Also, the anthropogenic resources are in there again. We do need to step that up, but they all come together. And basically the principles underlying the UNRMS are the 10 principles that underlie it. It's state rights and responsibility in the management of resources. It's responsibility to the planet, integrated, indivisible management of resources, social contract on natural resources, service orientation, comprehensive resource recovery, continuous strengthening of core competence and capabilities, health and safety, innovation, transparency, circularity, and finally, value addition. So it's all about, again, how do we make sure we do this in a way that creates value in the communities at local level, but also actually creates value at global level. And it starts with us accepting the same values for how we actually want to do this as a global community, because these issues, the minerals issues that I'm talking about specifically, for sure are global, but even more so perhaps the climate pressures that we're seeing. We're seeing people in some parts of the world suffering because of the actions that are happening in another part of the world. So it's time for us to come together, and this is how we should be coming together and to talk about it more. And this is where also women are already playing a really critical role in this, of course, as they should be playing a critical role in all of the mitigations that we need to do for climate change as we go forward. One final point I just want to make, that so we sort of need the three things I had on my initial slide, but we actually also need to think about intelligence. We need to understand the greater picture. So I want to just make the case, and this is a little bit of a shout out for something that we're running here in the UK, and at BGS we have a UK Critical Minerals Intelligence Centre. But what we're really trying to do is to understand these pressures again, what causes criticality and what are the potential mitigations. And the way we do that is mapping the critical mineral supply chains, tracking the stocks and flow and understanding those, and also monitoring market dynamics and understanding the wider economic, geopolitical, environmental, and ethical risks and opportunities surrounding resource management, really. So in sort of conclusion, what are we going to do about getting the resources that we need? Well, we are not exactly going to manage without them, but we probably should try to have more sustainable consumption and more equality sort of across the world in what is our access to the resources. We should move towards a more circular economy. We should design for recycling. We should be much, much better at resource efficiencies. We should mine, we should extract things. We should do so in a very a sustainable way and in a way that we can be proud of. And then finally, my last point, my previous slide, is we actually also have to understand the resources from geology to supply chains, and actually all the way into the consumer side of things, so that we can make smart decisions, not just for ourselves, but for the global community. And with that, I am going to say thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for the interesting thoughts that we need resources, but we need to use less and recycle them so that we can participate in the so-called degrowth that our world needs. And to serve these needs in a more efficient way, I think the women have the capacity to look at problems in an integrated way, in a diversified way, and that's where our role will be very important to solve our climate change problems. I think I will now pass to Julie. And in the end, if we have time, we will open to questions. Okay, and thank you, Karen, for your presence here. So, Julie Hollis is the Secretary General of the EUREL Service. It's our Secretary General. She's EUREL Service aimed to build a geological service for Europe to deliver pan-European geoscientific data, information, and knowledge to inform the EU policy and support to the Green Deal. So Julie, for more than 20 years, worked in leading geoscience research and senior management roles in academia, geological service, and government in Belgium, Greenland, Denmark, and Australia. So very diverse geographical areas, providing strategic direction, building relationships at the science policy interface, and managing regional geoscience programs. She holds a PhD in geology and a Master in Science Communication and Public Engagement, both from the University of Edinburgh. Julie is going to talk to us about not weakness, but strength, the role of listening in building relationships and effective change. Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Teresa. And thank you also for the invitation to join this very interesting forum. So as Teresa introduced me, I'm the Secretary General of EUREL Surveys, which is a not-for-profit organization that represents the geological survey organizations of Europe. I am a geologist I started out being a geologist because, like most geologists I know, I loved everything to do with rocks and minerals and the natural world. And I can change the slides here. Here we are. Because there was no geology course when I did high school, I didn't really discover that my intense interest in everything to do with the land and the sea and the shape of coastlines and mountains and grains of sand on the beach was all connected in something called geology, until I went to university and took geology as an extra subject. And then I realized, like a bolt of lightning, that this is what I was interested in. The earth. And not because we can dig minerals out of the ground and make money out of it, even though that happens to be a fundamental requirement for the physical infrastructure that we use for all aspects of modern society, but because geology was able to tell me about the shape of coastlines and mountains and grains of sand on the beach and a million other interesting things, like how old the universe is and how ocean currents affect the climate and why the shape of South America and Africa fit together and so on. Geology for me was able to basically put everything into context on all timescales and all physical scales. It is essentially a scaleless, timeless science. But for a subject as universal as it seems to be, remarkably, geology has become apparently even more relevant within my lifetime. Around the time that I was born, about 50 years ago in the early 1970s, climate change became measurable in terms of global warming. When I learned that, it made me feel a little bit like it was my fault. And of course, to some degree it is, just as it's the fault of all of us and those before us. And now it's our job to do the best we can to fix it. And a geological knowledge of the Earth is extremely important in being able to do that, to mitigate the effects of climate change. But I didn't really know anything about that until the early 90s when I was doing my undergraduate geology degree, by which time, as far as I could understand, it was already accepted science in the geological community that climate change was well underway. But that recognition was still more or less restricted to the scientific community. And about 10 years later, I realized that something was changing, not the science, but the human reaction to the science. And I had that personal realization when one of my brothers recommended a book to me, this book about climate change, which was written by a geologist, in fact, and how climate change was something real and something pretty concerning. And then my dad started talking to me about it. And of course, none of what they were telling me was news to me, but it was news to them, and which I found slightly annoying, given that I'd been shocked by this knowledge about 10 years earlier and apparently had failed to pass this information on to them, who are now telling it back to me. And here we are another 20 years on, and the context is a bit different again. The acceptance and the knowledge of the situation we're in is much more widespread. Finally, as has already been mentioned at COP28 this week, we have a commitment to a transition away from fossil fuels, which is something. But I haven't always worked in geoscience specifically related to climate action. Not many geologists, I think, have, but there are certainly a lot of them doing that now. I started out in academia and moved on to making geological maps, the main purpose of which was to encourage mineral exploration companies to come and invest money and explore for minerals. But for me, it was mainly about my interest in understanding rocks. And since then, I've moved away from geological mapping to leading EUREL surveys, an association that represents the geological surveys of Europe, as they say, and particularly in regard to a project in which 48 partners from 35 countries are collaborating on work related to mineral raw materials, to geoenergy, including geothermal, hydrogen storage, carbon capture, and to groundwater quality and quantity, to coastal zone management, and wind farm siting, and more. And all of this diverse work from so many European countries is all targeted at the same goal, which is tackling climate change and a green transition. But today I decided not to talk about the technical details of any of this. Instead, I wanted to talk about something completely different, about listening to people. And maybe that seems a little bit strange, but to give it some context, a few years ago, while I was doing some remote field work in Greenland to make a geological map, I had a small life-changing experience. I broke my leg very badly, with the ultimate result that I more or less can't do field work anymore. So in order to develop my skills in something else that I loved and refocus my work, I did a master's degree in science communication and public engagement. And what started out as being an interest in writing and communicating became the slow realization that telling people about science was not nearly as effective in achieving any kind of change as actually listening to the people I was supposed to be talking to. And this is why I wanted to talk about this today, because listening, I believe, is probably the most effective path to achieving change, which clearly we need on many fronts if we are going to achieve the climate action we need. And particularly because it involves implementing change that also involves dealing with human emotions and values. And whenever this kind of engagement is needed, engagement on a human level, then real connection will only come not just with telling, but much more so with listening. So this was a very difficult realization for me to come to, that if you want to connect with people to make change happen, what is far more effective is not trying to impart information onto them, but instead not to talk and instead to listen. And aside from the fact that listening is extremely important engaging with people, leading people, implementing change, I think the importance of listening is probably something that many professional women might be in a particularly good position to understand. Not necessarily because they're better at it, but rather because of their experience with listening and being listened to. And to explain, I'll share a story of my own. So probably like a lot of women, probably including people listening today, I've experienced the phenomenon of being ignored in a professional environment. I remember one particular incident, not the only one, when as a young geologist close to finishing my first degree, I was doing some geological field work together with another student and a couple of my professors. And I pointed out what I thought was an interesting and useful observation in the rocks that we were looking at, and no one reacted. And I was quite sure that they'd heard me. They seemed to acknowledge that they'd heard me say something, but they simply moved on to talking about something else. And I was a bit bewildered by this, partly because I thought what I'd said was very relevant and potentially important. And a few minutes later, the other student, a male student, made exactly the same observation that I had just made. And the two professors, also both men, got really excited about what he'd said. And one of them actually congratulated him for making such an important and careful observation. And I was completely stunned by this. On reflection, I'm pretty sure that even though they all heard me speaking, none of them took any notice of me because they simply failed to register what I said. And as I say, this has happened a few times over the years, mostly when I was younger and earlier in my career. But only earlier this year did I discover that, in fact, this is an experience common to very many professional women and has been documented as one of a number of key reasons why women are not well represented in leadership positions. This selective hearing when it comes to women, this lack of listening can simply remove women from the situation, from the conversation. And it may not necessarily be out of any conscious intent, although it might be, but also because of a subconscious bias. And interestingly, I also read an article recently about a trans man who was sharing some of his experiences of some of the surprising ways that he found people behaved differently towards him as a man after his previous experience of people interacting with him as a woman. And one of his observations was that as a man in the workplace, People didn't interrupt him as much when he was talking and listened to him more. So when you're faced with being ignored, it's demoralizing, of course, and it can result in those people who are not being listened to simply disengaging. If people aren't listening to you, if they don't value you, then why bother? It's fair enough reasoning. But I think it's worth thinking about a bit more, because of course, it doesn't just apply to women, it applies to everyone. Everyone wants to be heard. Sometimes simply being heard is enough, but it's certainly a necessary minimum. But because a lot of women have this experience, it puts them in the position of being able to recognize the importance of listening and taking advantage of that. Because as it turns out, listening is a hugely overlooked and important skill. So if you understand the value of listening, you have an opportunity to enact change. I would like to demonstrate what is possible through engaging in listening to your audience, to your stakeholders, to your partners, to your competitors, to your adversaries, by telling you another story that I heard a few years ago and which really had an effect on me. It's got nothing to do with climate action or geology, but I think it's an amazing story of what's possible in using listening to enact change. It is a story about the secret meetings of pro-life and pro-choice groups in the US. This story starts on the 30th of December in 1994, almost 30 years ago, when a pro-life activist walked into 2 women's health clinics in Massachusetts in the US and started shooting people. He killed 2 clinic workers and wounded several other people, and there was widespread media coverage and outrage that this had happened. The state governor and the cardinal issued a joint call for common ground talks between activists and an end to inflammatory language to try and prevent this from happening again. But because it wasn't possible for activists from these 2 diametrically opposed groups to publicly acknowledge that they were talking to each other, because they would have actually been threatened or experienced violence themselves, mediators arranged for private meetings between 3 pro-choice and 3 pro-life activist leaders. And the point was not to allow for one group to try and change the minds of the other. From the outset, everyone knew that that was not possible. These views were part of these people's fundamental beliefs and identities, and challenging people's understanding and validation of their own identities is extremely threatening. The purpose instead was to broaden their perspectives, foster human connection, and find common ground. So for the next 6 years, these people met in secret and spent over 150 hours talking. They agreed to meet as individuals rather than representing their organizations, and to talk confidentially to build relationships of mutual respect and understanding. When they started out, these people were afraid to speak to each other, and they viewed each other's opinions as abhorrent. So they had to set ground rules on the kind of language that they could use to speak to each other, and terminology that was mutually acceptable to avoid polarizing rhetoric and just descending into argument and impasse. They shared their personal stories, which were particularly important in building relationships. And as the sessions continued, their relationships developed. And naturally, their public language changed about each other, becoming more compassionate and respectful, even if they continued to completely disagree about the issue. So while they never agreed or expected to agree, they became able to, quote, disagree frankly, become clearer in heart and mind about their activism, and contribute to a more civil and compassionate society. One of those involved was the president of the Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts, said afterwards that these dialogues changed her life. And the then president of the Massachusetts Citizens for Life reported that she felt it was a miracle. After 6 years, the 6 involved co-authored this article in the Boston Globe entitled "Talking with the Enemy," in which they advocated for dialogue. These are 6 people who at the outset could not even sit in a room with each other. So the reason I tell this story is that it gives me undying hope and confidence that change is possible when faced with even the most extreme, the most emotionally held disagreement about what is right and wrong, about how to find a path forward. Probably like most scientists, probably like most people, I often feel despairing about the possibility that we can achieve the real climate action that we need. But a story like this demonstrates to me that if we listen to each other and engage and make real human connections, it could be possible. So what I've talked about today is no doubt slightly different from what you might have been expecting, but I wanted to share these ideas because of my experience of the process of learning more about science communication and public engagement. My experience of working for an organization that represents a diverse group of organizations and people, all aiming to contribute to support delivering the Green Deal through a swathe of different geoscientific areas of expertise in energy, minerals, water, and working in a field, geology, that struggles with a bad public reputation and a lack of recognition of its great importance in contributing to climate action. It becomes really important to engage with people who might not have much knowledge of the subject or who might have strong negative views about some of these subjects, about mining or carbon capture, for example. And through all of these experiences, I see that listening to people is extremely important in order to understand them, both as a necessary starting point and also as a means to progress the conversation towards implementing change. If you want to affect change, and if that change requires collaboration with other people, as climate action must, I encourage you to take opportunities that you have to listen to and include others so that you are more able to take them with you on a shared journey towards implementing change. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, for your interesting sharing of your thoughts. And I took out a lot of things, but one of them is that energy and geology converge to solve climate change problems, but people need to be able to listening to each other. And I would say that listening and dialoguing, it's something we need to achieve the climate change goals. And really, it was impressive your sharing. So without further ado, I will pass the word to the last speaker, but not the least. It's Maria João Rolim. She's a lawyer and economist, visiting scholar of the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia University Law School. She holds a PhD on energy law and sustainability from the Center for Energy, Petroleum and Mineral Law and Policy of the University of Dundee, Scotland. She also holds a degree from the European Law from London School of Economics. She's a master in economic law from Federal University of Minas Gerais and partner of the firm Rolim Goulart Cardoso. She has an extensive experience in advising private and public companies, governments, and ONGs in energy transition, and ESG strategies, and has been actively involved in the ongoing Brazil hydrogen strategy discussions, as well as CCUS regulation, wind offshore and other new technologies regulation. So she is also, although being a lawyer, she is very strong in energy issues, and she's going to talk to us about sorry, I'm not seeing about women in energy from oil to renewables. Thank you, Maria João, for being here. Thank you for having accepted the invitation, and we are keen to hear you.
Hi, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Teresa, for inviting me. It has been really exciting hear all of you and the insights you have. I don't think that I bring news, but maybe I bring more about my perspective working for a long time in the renewable sector, in the energy sector, and because I live in Brazil, to work in energy sector is more about to work with renewables. We do have oil and gas and other fuels, but as a lawyer working at the power sector, I've been my whole life working with renewables. And it brings me to think about what is important to make more space, more room for women to work in the energy sector. During this time of transition, during this time when we have the opportunity to change the way you consume and you produce energy, and at the same time you can take this opportunity to change the way women can take part in this market. So it's more about, my message I would say is more about that, let's not miss this opportunity to do that. I have a brief presentation. Let me see if I can do this, it's always, okay. Well, the current status, I think I don't have actually news, but women have historically been underrepresented in the energy world. I would say that not only in the energy world, but in the market, the job market, the workforce in general. And as I heard, and I'm talking in the middle of geologists, I would say that since the Stone Age, women have been placed in a place where it's not for them to work with some activities like to deal with rocks, not to study, not to take energy from it, and so on and so on. And because our history was based in energy coming from rocks, and as you see, we still need mining and geologists to do whatever we want to do in the future. It has not been supposed something for women to do. And that's why, because of that, we got used to choose other professions when we had the opportunity to do so. Some professionals like be a teacher or something like it was supposed to be for women in general. Even in between the areas like in medicine, to be a surgeon has not been something for women. In the energy is the same. There are areas where you can have more space and others you don't have. But women represent today less than 20% of global workforce in general, well below in the energy workforce and well below the global economy, while the average it is 40%, which is still not equal, but a bit better. And in senior management positions in major energy firms, it's around just 18%. And it is, as you can see, even worldwide, women in senior positions is around 18%. And why do it cares why women in senior position? Some people say that it will come at some point to be equal, but we have a huge gap to manage until it happens. There are some statistics that say that we need kind of 100 years to close this gap. And I'm not sure if you are willing to wait such a long time, if we have some ways to do it better. And climate change is offering us an opportunity to deal with that and to change together with the way we consume energy, to change the way you see women in the market, in the energy sector. And breaking the energy sector in source in technology, we see that in oil and gas, it is 22% just women, women taking part in this market. It's really a hard market because people are supposed, the workforce, people working in this area are supposed to be sometimes outside the home, to be in the platforms and things like that. And if you think about platforms of oil and gas, you don't see a lot of women there. Even today, they are news when they are there. So it is really a small part of women. Wind is 21%, which is better if you think that wind energy in scale has been something new. And all renewables are 32%, and solar has been the 40% already, because last years we've been seeing solar improving, photovoltaic energy improving a lot, and after the COVID, the new demand, the new offer of energy has been based on renewables. But why is that? Because these renewables areas, they have proved to be areas that women have been more accepted working there, have been more included in this workforce. So we have to take this opportunity that we're going to change and do this transition energy for renewables to open more and more opportunities for women. So ensuring gender equality in the transition to the sustainable energy models depends on, in my opinion, I see you to say, and based in some studies, of course, depends on making sure that women are change agents and it sent me to Julie words that listen is important to change. So women are maybe better placed to listen each other. So it is important to be agents of change when they do in terms of energy professionals, because the underrepresentation of women compared to men work in the energy sector. So we need to put more women in the sector, to trust more that they will do the same job as men do, and to put their qualities in more perspective, like Carvalho, I forgot her name, sorry, said that women are very modest to present themselves sometimes. So we have to trust more in ourselves that we are able to do this work. And in energy decision makers, it is important we have an underrepresentation of women in energy policy making and decision making bodies at all levels. So even in climate change during the COP, we couldn't see many women working in the decision making level, although a lot of women were there, and we could see people who were there talking or having the opportunity to take part in negotiations, were not that many women. So if we want to change, we need to put women in this decision place, because only them will be able to say what is good for us. It's like men deciding what is good to put more women in the workforce. And they have, of course, a partial view of that. So we need women saying about women. And even between women, we have kind of difference to work and in terms of equality. We have a Black woman, we have women in different situations, women in different places. So we are not a group like we equal just as women. We have so many differences that we still have to work even among us. And also in terms of consume energy, the gender difference of energy consumption and demand should also be addressed. Women in general, they consume less energy than men, and it because of the not equal pay, the gap on payment, the gap on access to energy, and all the structure conditions that put women in this position. So I like to say that it is something that we are fighting against, is something that comes from years and years, the Stone Age. And the name of the stage says it is a Stone Age, something that was supposed to be for men. So to change it, I like to say that now we went from Stone Age to Wind Age, to Solar Age, to more fluid things age, like Water Age. So we have this opportunity that we need the stone, but we cannot see the women as we used to be to see at the Stone Age. So I like to finish my presentation, bringing this last slide about mind the gaps and level the player field. Porque, in fact, what we want is to have the same opportunities, equal opportunities to reach the same results or even better. That's what I would say that we all want to. So the number of workers pursuing degrees relevant to energy sector are not keeping pace with the growing demand. It means that there are more jobs than people to fill in the energy transition, in the renewables field. Even though the space, if you don't take the space is going to be occupied by, this space is going to be occupied by men for sure. So we need to work in some professionals, in some areas to fill in this gap. The energy sector requires higher skilled workers than any other industries, or maybe met some of the other industries. So we need to put women to study and to incentivize them to study higher skilled careers that are able to fill in this gap and to offer jobs in the market. There are already in the energy sector, some in the renewable sector, the energy sector nowadays, skilled labor shortage. Again, we need to get this space for us. And many fossil fuel workers have the skills and specializations needed to fill clean energy roles. So we have these men then doing the transition for them from the oil and gas industry to the renewables area as well. So we have this competition to work, and we need equal opportunities to fill in this gap. There is a gap to be filled in. And today also workers in nuclear, oil and gas, some of the highest have some of the highest wages in the entire economy. So it's well-paid area in the technical ones. It is compared to other areas. My message in this final slide would be that if there is a gap and we have the skills to do that, what is missing for us to get this, to fill in this gap and close this eternal and aging gap between women and men? And I would say that, in my opinion, we need to change policies, actually. I think regulation and policies are needed to give us equal opportunities, and not only policies related to jobs, but related to everything that is around the job. So if you think about the activities that women are in charge, we work in our jobs and we still are working at home, maternity leaving, and comparing to share the kids' job and to take care of the kids. So there are so many other policies around that we need to focus on. And when you talk about policies, we tend to think about quotas or things like that. I'm not against, but it's not enough. We need to have policies around the job to fill in this gap. Education policies related to other areas. Maybe because I'm a lawyer and I'm an economist as well, but much more a lawyer, I always think about the role of the regulation to tackle some of some problems, and it is a problem to have this gap. And the other thing is to sell ourselves better and to sell the idea, which is truth, that it's not to put women in that position or to use this gap to fill in with women is good for the economy itself. There are already statistics showing that the women taking part in some positions are better than men sometimes. And there are that kind of positions now being offered. So I would say that that would be my message. We need policies to fill in these gaps and to bring more women to use this opportunity now. And some food for thought. I forgot it wasn't my last one. This is my last one. This, as I've been saying, opportunity to redress or to readdress, to look at this unequal trend with more inclusive policies, as I said. Education, to increase the number of women entering vocational or educational programs relevant to energy and to other areas, technical areas that are missing or are looking for skilled person. And in terms of the energy, the gap requires participation levels of women in construction and manufacturing, which account for a significant share of energy jobs and remains dominated by men. So some of the jobs in the energy industry were already could kind of be there, but construction and manufacturing, it is dominated by men completely. It is really hard to find women. So some of the companies are now offering for young engineers to work in things that they like to actually on the floor, because it's not that usual. To promote women in senior positions, I would say always compare. Consider to have a woman in a position if you have the opportunity to do that. When I'm hiring someone to my office, I always try to see if there is some woman that could fill in this gap. And keep an eye on imbalance, because sometimes it's just when you are looking to your team or some opportunity that you have to make a difference because you are in a better position. I would assume that we all have this better position nowadays. We have this obligation to look for the other ones and to think about the imbalance that there are, and not comparing just a man or a woman, but the conditions they have to be there and the conditions they have around there to reach or to get this opportunity. In Brazil, recently we had something that an experience that got my attention, because to put the government, the last government spoke openly that they would like to put some women in the energy sector, in the power, but they couldn't find skilled enough. And it was the last government, not this one. And my friends and myself, we decided to create a movement that is called Yes, They Exist. And then we listed more or less 200 women that could fill in this gap, and we gave it to the politicians, to the Minister of Energy. And they put two women actually, in high positions, and they've been making a difference. So this idea of yes, they exist is something that we need to create in all these areas that are dominated by men, because one of the most used excuses is that I tried, but I couldn't find a woman to fill in this gap. So some food for thought, some things for some ideas to consider in the future. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you, Maria João, for calling our attention to the need to capture women for these kind of jobs and fill the gap. And now that there is a gap, fill the gap with women, because they are really equally capable like men. And you talked about something else that is very important, that is the need of regulation. I think the European Commission is following very good steps and implementing this type of regulation, because and the other issue that we should do, we women, and this is a little bit inspired by Julie and by what you said now, is that women need to coach other women and bring them to this kind of jobs. And by speaking about coaches and coaching, there are men that also foment the women, and I should pay some how can I say something I owe, and we all owe, to Sergio Hollinger, because he's a man. He's responsible at EUREL, and he's promoting this kind of workshops about women talking about themselves. So Sergio, thank you for your role in this promotion. And we really reached the end of our time. I don't know if there is any question, one question for the speakers. Maybe Sergio, you would like to say something?
Yes, very, very few words. I was very impressed about this session. Really admire and I'm full of admiration and respect for the professionalism and for the grace you have presented your topics. I would not like to ask something because we are at the end of this meeting. We already are now 2 hours after the meeting, but it was excellent. No words how to describe how good was it. I invite you, part of you, all of you, to come to the next webinar. As I've already shared with you, it will be about energy resilience driven by women. Good luck. Have a nice new year. Happy New Year. And thank you very, very, very much.
So thank you to all of you. Thank you, Sergio. And it's my place to say also very nice new year, and for those that celebrate, nice Christmas. Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Bye, all the best.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Bye bye.
Bye.